Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Heather Venegas, and I am one of the hosts for King County Recovery Conversations. And today I'm joined in the studio with a good friend of mine, Christopher Archiopoli. And I hope I'm not butchering your name by saying that. Welcome, Christopher.
Good afternoon, Heather. How are you?
I'm great. It's really fun to have you in the studio with me today. Christopher and I have been having conversations and connecting with each other for a few years now, and it's really sweet to get to have this type of conversation and share it with our podcast audience. So, Chris, let's just have you start us off by telling us a little bit about your recovery journey, and then we'll work our way up to today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a it's a winding tale, as most people's are. I mean, I don't know that my story is exactly unique. You don't butcher my name, but it is Archiopoli. There's you don't do the O.
Okay.
So that is part of my recovery journey at 42 is realizing my name is always going to get mispronounced. So, my recovery journey. I always tie it to, my identity as a queer person. I have known since, a young age that I was queer. Didn't always know what that was. It wasn't until, between 7th and 8th grade that I really realized what and could name what that thing was that was different about me. And I grew up in a, mildly conservative family. I don't blame my parents for anything. I think one of my favorite quotes is, growing up queer is learning to love yourself without example. So, straight parents don't know how to raise a queer child. So, you grow up knowing that you're different, but not necessarily knowing why and not knowing what to do with that. So there was a lot of internalized shame and stigma around that, not knowing that I was different, not knowing what to do with it, and not feeling comfortable with my identity. And in my early 20s, I started, becoming a little bit more comfortable with being out. I was out to a lot of my friends. But at one point, one of my former boyfriends introduced me to meth. And meth was really what started opening some doors for me around being comfortable with myself. Meth is pervasive in the queer community, particularly among gay men, as a sex drug. And part of what is fun about it is it opens you up and it makes you comfortable with yourself. And I found something that I really enjoyed. And, sex was more fun and everything was more fun. And it's also tied to, in 2008, I acquired HIV. And even though I had sort of dabbled with meth, I hadn't really been particularly sexually active. I did. And so finding out that I had acquired HIV at that point really sent me off. I looked at my life and thought, wow, I'm unlovable. I don't know that I deserve anything else. And so I threw myself into work and was working 6-7 days a week, way more than 40 hours, and wasn't having time to get the things done that I needed to get done at home. And so, I started using cocaine as daddy's little helper. And, it kept me up for a few extra hours. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's way better than coffee.
Well, yeah.
And so, I would be able to stay up for a few extra hours and do a little bit more cleaning in my apartment, watch a little bit more TV, do the things that helped me to wind down and made me feel good about my life. But at one point I lost my dealer for cocaine, and meth was just much easier to find. And there was a 3 or 4 year period in between where I just hadn't used meth at all. But, I refound meth, and, the big thing that changed the trajectory of my life and really started my recovery journey was when I got introduced to using it intravenously. And, once I learned that, I went from within 3 months being well established in my career, being successful, to 3 months later losing my job and basically being unhoused. And my family kind of scooped me up, moved me to Arizona, which was what they knew, and it seemed like it was the right decision. Ultimately, it turned out to be far worse for me, because now all of a sudden I didn't have a job. I was getting unemployment. I was living with my parents. I'd been torn away from my entire life, and it really just made everything worse. And one of the challenges that I think we find is that even though I knew I needed to do something, I couldn't find a recovery model that resonated with me. In Arizona, I started looking for recovery options, and I kept getting introduced to 12-step programs. And as a queer person, I have a complicated relationship with religion, and I know that 12-step is not religious per se, but there's God with a capital G. There's a room with people holding hands and reading from a book, and they're asking for money, and to me it felt like church.
And many meetings are in church basements. So you're at a church for the 12-step meeting. That must have felt unsafe and uncomfortable, and maybe like you didn't fit in or belong, or
all of those things. And it felt like I didn't. I felt like I didn't belong, and I didn't see my place in it,
Right.
and I didn't know how I was going to sort of balance, who I knew I was and the parts that I was confident about with trying to find recovery. And so it kept me out of it for a long time. I remember this older woman too that I had talked to at a peer organization in Arizona, and she kept showing me the feeling thermometer and wanting me to rate myself on the feeling thermometer. And it just felt so out of touch. It didn't work for me. And so I ended up coming back to kind of meandering my way back up to Washington. I was in Arizona for 8 months, 8 months, and moved to Olympia for a little while and was in Olympia for about 6 months. And then I got coaxed back to Seattle by a friend who was opening a salon up here. And I probably wasn't quite ready to be back in Seattle. And I had been sober for about 9 months, but then I refound meth. And went in and out of meth for several years, from 2013 to 2016. And 2016 is really when I consider myself to be in recovery. I believe in a harm reduction approach. What saved my life was finding Seattle area support groups, which is now Pure Seattle. They have a group called Strength Over Speed. And Strength Over Speed is a group for gay and bisexual men with seeking recovery from crystal meth. But it's not abstinence-based. It really honors everyone's path. And I credit that group and that organization with saving my life. I know that I wouldn't be here without it. 2016, I remember this recovery journey really started, not to make this political, but I remember the night that Donald Trump won in November of 2016, and that really was what said, I need to get my life together, because I was high that night. And I remember rolling over in bed and looking at my iPad and seeing that he had won. And I remember I went on sort of a bender for the next week. But after that, I said, I need to be clear-eyed for the next 4 years. I cannot be, I cannot be doing this to myself anymore. In some ways have to credit that man for really pushing me to really embrace recovery. And
whatever it takes.
Exactly. I have to give credit where it's due. That was really where recovery started for me. And, as I say that November of 2016 is when I entered recovery. I got a peer coach through Seattle area support groups. Mark, who was my coach, is an amazing human being, one of my best friends, somebody I consider family. He got me through 6 months of coaching. Then I became a group facilitator of SOS. In 2018, I became... Strength over speed.
Strength, yeah.
Yep, sorry. I go for that. We all like our acronyms.
I do love it. I just wanted...
At work, I have a spreadsheet of like 200 acronyms that
There's
I have to
a lot.
reference.
Yes.
And then I became a CCAR recovery coach in 2018. And the further I got into this model of recovery and really embracing, like wanting to help other people as well, I did hair for 20 years and still do hair, a few days a month. But doing hair became less genuine and less sincere as I got into recovery. Doing hair, you can make an impact on people's lives, you can change people's lives, but recovery just felt much more real. And so I started looking for ways to change my career and move in this direction. And so in 2022, I was given the opportunity to work for Pure Seattle as their director. Worked there for a couple years, and now I am a project manager for the LEAD program, which is another harm reduction, long-term case management approach to helping people.
It's brilliant. I love the illustration of your story, that coming full circle of so many of us who have walked through fire, each on our own individual path with different challenges and things that are a part of that journey, then through our own healing and recovery and moving forward in life, feel that call, that heart decision that we were speaking of really wanting to be of service to others and have an impact for good in the world, and how those opportunities find us. And I love how in your story, SASG was the place that you attribute that saved your life, and that you went to the SOS group, and there was another group that you went to there also, wasn't there?
Yes. So actually, I got introduced to SASG when it was at Dunshee House. And so when I acquired HIV in 2008, they had a support group for people who were newly diagnosed with HIV. And I had found this group randomly online, and I was in the attic of this old house on 17th and John. So anybody that remembers Dunshee House or bought a Christmas tree there, it's a really special place to a lot of us. And I remember going to this group up in the attic there, and that was actually what spurred me to look for groups at SASG when I was really looking for recovery, because I remembered that support group. And that support group is really what got me through the early time of, kind of coping with my diagnosis and my status as being HIV positive. So when I was able to find SOS and re-engage with that same organization, it was really important. And so when I started at Pure Seattle, they no longer actually had a support group for people who were newly diagnosed with HIV. That part, even though they had started out as Seattle AIDS support groups, HIV has changed so much over the years since the 80s and 90s. And sometimes we forget that it's still around. We forget that there's still so many people living with HIV and AIDS. And I think that support systems have kind of dwindled because of that. And so when I became director at Pure Seattle, I made it a purpose of mine to reestablish some of those things. And I started a group called Positive People, and we still meet. It's a weekly group for people living with HIV. It started out as a group for people newly diagnosed, but I shifted that as more people came kind of seeking community. And what we found is that there's a real hunger and a real desire for people living with HIV to connect with each other. in a lot of ways, pharmaceutical companies have placated us with great medications that keep us alive because you're not angry if you're not dying. So, we all take our pills, and, even people who are not positive take their pills so that they, it's called PrEP. So people, can take that daily, or they can do something called disco dosing to avoid acquiring HIV. And there's still a desire, even though it's not that same sort of urgency that it once was, there's still this sort of shared bond that we all have with each other, and a desire to connect. And I think that's part of humanity, is there's a desire to connect with people that are like us.
Absolutely. And that's the power of like any kind of like 12-step group or any kind of recovery circle, or bringing people together that have that shared experience that gives us hope and meaning and a place to be of service and give back to those coming after us. And it's such a beautiful model, right? It works really well. And that's what I love, like, about peers. Walking shoulder to shoulder with somebody who's lived in my shoes, who understands what I'm going through. There's like no greater source of strength and help and support for me than that. And having the honor of getting to be that as a woman in long-term recovery. I'm not a certified peer or a recovery coach, but I do work with other women that are newer to recovery and those that are also in long-term recovery. And it's such a beautiful, powerful thing. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity it gives me to share what I've walked through with others and see it make a difference in their lives. And then them sharing and being that for someone else. And just this gorgeous community of connection and unconditional love and acceptance that we give each other. I think it's magic. And I think that doesn't just happen in 12-step rooms, or for people that are dealing with substance use disorder. It happens everywhere where people are like-minded and can share about something they've all been through. It's so healing. And I'm so grateful that we have that. I love how one of the things we talked about is kind of the thread that we were pulling through this conversation today, and that is part of your story, was the shame and the stigma you felt about all these different things as you walked through your life, and how the medicine, and that's the cancer, and that the medicine is connection and community. Could you share about that a little bit with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we talked last week about this, how I spent a lot of, I grew up in a family that, we didn't talk about the ugly stuff. And I think that's really common. I think that's a very common thing because, it's not fun to talk about the bad, the hard stuff. And we all like to put this outer look out into the world that, we're perfect. Everything's great. Everything's sunny. That's what social media is all about. That's how we are taught, is like, good vibes only. Let's not don't do the don't focus on the negative. But as part of that, I held this shame of being queer. I held this shame of being HIV positive. I was single for 10 years after becoming HIV positive because I didn't think that I was lovable, and then I held this shame of being in recovery. And, not only was I just in recovery, but I was an IV crystal meth user. It wasn't one of the pretty addictions. Like, people sort of sympathize with, people who drink, or, there are certain ones that are a little bit more acceptable. But, I was, an IV crystal meth user. So I held all of this stuff. Yeah. And I believe that, I kept sort of receding within myself because of all of this shame and this stigma that society kind of places on us and that I internalized. And finding recovery, helped me to learn how to be proud of my story, we're recording a podcast where
We
I'm
sure
talking, to however many people are going to listen to this. But, I'm not shy about telling it because I believe that secrets grow in the dark. It becomes a cancer. It becomes something that can really eat at you to the point where, it can kill you.
Yeah.
And, dragging things out into the light, that's really what I see as being one of the largest correctors of substance use disorder, of, any sort of like recovery situation. I think one of the biggest barriers to recovery are shame and stigma.
Exactly.
When people don't feel good about themselves, they're not going to share with other people. They're not going to want to connect with other people. When society tells you that you're a junkie, you're an addict, you're a loser, that you're unlovable, that you're unsavable,
Right.
why would you want to be part of that?
And why would you think you deserved treatment and to get better and that you could ask for it? I agree. And I think spreading hope by sharing our stories and using our voices and being, recovering out loud is a huge piece of that. Because if people don't hear that it's possible and that we all deserve that opportunity to have a life that is thriving and free and filled with possibility, we're going to lose more and more people.
Yeah.
So thank you for using your voice. I know you do it in a lot of ways and in a lot of different avenues that you are an advocate.
Yeah, I try to find lots of different paths, because there's lots of different parts of my identity also.
Right.
I'm a queer person. I am HIV positive. I'm in recovery, and many, many other things. So I, commit to that in my work. LEAD really is about helping people with long-term case management for people with behavioral health conditions and substance use disorder. It's a harm reduction approach. So that's sort of my work life. In a volunteer capacity, I'm on the community advisory board for UW Positive Research, which is a organization with the University of Washington that focuses on HIV research and building community in that way. I volunteer as a group facilitator at Peer Seattle, a peer coach as well still. I facilitate Positive People. We do quarterly socials for people living with HIV. We're hoping to get that monthly as Desire grows. And then I also serve on the King County Board of Health as a community stakeholder. That's a long list of things, but
You do more than that, I know.
yeah, I also do things with you all with the
Yes.
King County Recovery Coalition and the Washington Recovery
Yes, you do.
Alliance. But I think like sharing a story might be the best way to demonstrate that.
Love that.
I recently started finding a way to combine my passions. There's an organization called Bailey Boucher, and they work with people living with HIV. They're down in Madison Valley, and they've been around for a long time, I think since the 90s. And I recently contacted them and asked them if I could come once a month and start doing haircuts for a few hours.
Fabulous.
And this last Friday was the first time that I'd gone and done that. And in 2.5 hours, I probably did 6 or 7 haircuts. But the last one is probably the one, like the most powerful. I was cutting someone's hair, and about halfway through the haircut, he kind of like lowered his voice and whispered, "It's like, you're doing a bunch of drug addicts' hair, right?" And I said, "Yes, I know that I'm doing a bunch of drug addicts' hair. I am also a drug addict. I am a person living with HIV. I've been in recovery for a long time, and I could just as easily be sitting in the chair that you're sitting in. So I'm here to connect with you all, and it doesn't bother, your stories don't bother me because I'm one of you." And he just kind of like stopped and looked at me and, "Well, you should tell people that because I bet they'll like you more." And I said, "Well, I will let people know, but you're welcome to tell people too because I'm not shy." That was just, it really struck me it sort of pulled all of that together for me, that like what I'm doing is, there's a power to being unashamed. There's a power to letting go of the stigma, and there's a power to sharing your story.
Absolutely. One of the things that you said when we spoke earlier was that you've thought about, like, what would have happened if you hadn't have, started actively using drugs and going down that path, and you hadn't have been diagnosed with HIV and all those things, and you had done the marketing degree and the things that you had planned earlier, how different your life would be, and then how you feel about yourself and the life you have today and where you're going. Could you share that?
Yeah. I mean, it is sort of like a sliding doors moment,
yes.
To make a old movie reference.
Yes.
but I love sci-fi, and I love the idea of like parallel universes and considering what could have been and what would have been, and I think I would have been boring. I could have gone down sort of the good boy established path, the one that would have been maybe the path of lower resistance, but that's not the person I am. Everyone that knows me knows that I am stubborn and I like to do things my own way. And I think that even though these were not necessarily conscious decisions, I look back at the decisions that sort of led me here. I met this boy in Phoenix, Arizona, and moved up to Seattle with him after only knowing him for 6 months. That's, in retrospect, that's a dumb decision.
Pretty bold.
And I let him, sort of introduce me to meth. And again, dumb decision. He handed me this pipe and I didn't even know what it was. I just did it because I trusted him. Dumb decision. And, I let this dealer introduce me into injecting drugs. Didn't even really know what I was getting into. Dumb decision. But, and I acquired HIV by being, by having unprotected sex, or, not doing the things that I knew to do, because I grew up in the time of AIDS. I knew what to do to protect myself, and I chose not to do it. Dumb decision. All in retrospect, and, on paper, those are all dumb decisions. But, I look at my life now and, I couldn't be happier with my life. This is a life that, you couldn't have charted. But I'm more comfortable at 42 with who I am than I ever was, in my teenage years or 20s or 30s, because I am confident in the person that I am. And if people don't like me, or if they want to look down on me, that's sort of their loss now. I'm happy with where I am. I have, I own my own home, and I've been in recovery since 2016. And, I have had 2 dogs. I recently had to put one of my dogs down, but
So sorry.
that dog saved my life in a lot of ways too. But I've got Gingy was an amazing dog, and Ada, my new 8-month-old Doberman, is also an amazing dog. Well, will be an amazing dog when she's fully trained. She's very sweet. I won't call her a good girl just yet. And then, I have so many amazing people that I've met in recovery that are my chosen family, George and Tony and Mark, and many others, my queer aunties, and, the people that, I would want by my side for anything. And then, I'm also very lucky to be in an amazing relationship with, the best man that I've ever met. And, all of these things wouldn't have happened without all of these dumb decisions. If I hadn't made all of the bad on paper decisions, I wouldn't have the life that I have today. And I am so grateful. I wouldn't have met you, and we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. And yeah, I'm just grateful for everything that I have.
One thing we didn't really explain for those that are listening that might be like, what is LEAD? Could you share a little bit about what LEAD is and how it differentiates from other programs that were, the same kind of a thing, but different?
Yeah, I mean, LEAD has started in Seattle in 2011, and it was one of the first of its kind diversion programs. And there are a lot of different diversion programs out there. I think more and more people are starting to recognize that we have to come up with alternatives to incarceration, alternatives to traditional policing. But most diversion programs happen after somebody's already been arrested, and so they're already sitting in jail. What's different from LEAD? It is a pre-booking diversion. So it's really, LEAD stands for Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. And so it really is a partnership with lots of different community stakeholders, but one of the key stakeholders really is the Seattle Police Department. But we also partner with the Seattle City Attorney's Office, King County Attorney's Office, or King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, missing words, thinking of the acronyms in my head, and organizations and community throughout Seattle, Burien, and White Center. And it is a harm reduction approach, and it's acknowledging that things traditionally haven't worked. It's identifying people who have been failed by the justice system, who have been criminally, legally involved, probably have behavioral health and substance use issues that are making a big impact on public safety, and finding ways to help them in non-traditional ways. And it is a circling of the wagons and finding, building solutions for folks, and doing it in a way that allows them to be part of that process. And so often people with substance use, people with behavioral health conditions are left out of the process. And that's, it's something I remember from sort of the height of my addiction, is people didn't listen to me. They didn't ask what I wanted. And, what I love about LEAD and what I love about being a peer is that, people listen to me now. And I really view it as my responsibility to use my voice to help amplify the voices of others now, so that we will listen to people and ask what they want and what do they need. And that's really what I try to do, in all of the things that I put my hands in, whether that's LEAD or at Peer Seattle, or the King County Board of Health, or UW Positive Research, or the Washington Recovery Alliance. Wherever I'm involved, that's my hope is to elevate and help others.
And you do it beautifully every day.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're so blessed to have you in our community and in our world. Christopher, is there anything you would like to say, maybe to somebody who's listening today, that either themselves are maybe newly diagnosed with HIV or facing, a substance use disorder challenge, or they're a loved one or a family member? Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
I think the thing I would like to echo that I sort of said earlier is that, don't let the secrets grow. Don't push things into the dark corners. It's okay to talk about these things. There's lots of people out there that share your story. I think that I tell people, you're special, but you're not unique. Most of our stories, once we start talking about them, we can see those echoes in other people's stories. So, talk to people. If things are going on, if you're having a hard time, seek support, seek people to talk to, seek community, because, the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of pain is connection. When you build community, that's when real beauty happens. And I'm so grateful for the community that I've built, and I welcome everyone into it. I want everyone to find what works for them.
Beautiful. So, Christopher, how do people find you and the Monday night group that you have and your socials and things like that?
Yeah, so I think Instagram is probably the best way, social media-wise. It's Christopher.Archiopoli is my Instagram handle. And within that one, you can connect to my dog's Instagram page also.
I must check that out.
Yeah, if you'd rather see cute dogs than, the stuff that I'm doing. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is Carchiopoli, which is my first initial and my last name. And then Positive People meets every Monday night from 6 to 7 at Pure Seattle.
And is there a website they can go to get information about events and the groups and things like that?
Yeah, so all of Pure Seattle's support groups are listed on their website, which is pureseattle.org. You can also search UW Positive Research. The King County Board of Health has information on the King County Public Health website. And then LEAD, you can search LEAD through I think the best way that I can remember, the website I can remember off the top of my head is wearepda.org. From there, you can kind of track the portals into the more directed information.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Do you have any upcoming events you'd like to share before we sign off?
There is nothing that is currently scheduled, but like I said, we're doing quarterly pause socials, and so our next one will be scheduled in September. So I do always post that stuff on my social media, on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I did lie. I actually do have an event coming up next week, next Wednesday, July 10th. I am supporting an event called Meth Talk. There's a UW doctoral candidate that I've been supporting his research for the past couple years. His name is Mike Berry. He's an amazing human being, really dedicated to supporting the community. And he's been focusing his research on the impacts of meth use in the queer community. And so he is holding a talk next Wednesday, July 10th from 6 to 7:30 at Pure Seattle. And I will be there supporting him and talking about my role in his research.
That's amazing. So everyone, if you want to come meet Christopher, you know where to go. Next, it'll be right after this podcast drops, so that's good timing. So you can come find Christopher and talk with him more and ask your questions. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a true delight, and I'm so excited to announce that Christopher is going to be one of our King County Recovery Conversation podcast hosts, so you're going to be getting to know him even more and joining him for conversations with guests that he's handpicking. So stay tuned for that. Here at KCRC and WRA, our next big event is during National Recovery Month, which is September. On September 15th, which is a Sunday, we're hosting Recovery Day at the Mariners, which is a multi-part day of events. We start with a recovery rally in Occidental Square at about 10:15 in the morning. Lots of speakers, countdown. We march to the game. It's a lot of fun. And then go to T-Mobile Park, where we have a pre-event on the Sky Level Concourse with a resources fair, recovery activities. We have people in recovery throw the first pitch. We have a recovery video on the Jumbotron. We are recovering out loud and proud, celebrating and having fun together. So I hope you can join us. You can get more information about that through mariners.com/recovery for the actual game tickets, and you can find it at the WRA and KCRC Facebook pages or kcrecovery.org, our website. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, for joining us today. And until we meet again, be well.